Welcome. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was Marjing Mayang Langbam, a Pena balladeer from Manipur, who has prayed to the gods, the four directional gods of Manipur, the guardian deities, to bless this event, and with a song called Saiho, the opening song, an invocation that is traditional to the oral ballad traditions of the Meiteis of Manipur. The reason Mr. Mayang Langbam is here is that we have just started a 3-day workshop here at the Indira Gandhi Center to look at the documentation and the archival of languages of the Tibeto-Burman family of Northeast India in the digital age. So Marjing, who is from Lai Hui, an ensemble of traditional musicians that has performed in New York and in Singapore and Tokyo and many other countries around the world, as well as in the major cities of India, is one of the participants in the workshop. He is especially here to work on the archives of Lai Hui Ensemble, a company that has been for the last 20 years been gathering material on the indigenous music and performance of Manipur. Therefore, this Maharaj Kumari Binodini Memorial Lecture that is being presented today by Professor Shobhana Chelliah of the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, is a very special occasion because it is thanks to the Indira Gandhi Center and especially to Dr. Ramesh Gaur and his wonderful team, including Sudipta Biswas and Vidya, who have welcomed us from Imasi Foundation, as well as Professor Shobhana Chelliah from UNT Texas, and her team of linguistics professionals and digital archiving specialists from Texas. And I see before me Mr. Levi Accord and Mary Byrne and Ashley Manis, and joined by Prafulla Basumatari from Assam. So the focus on this region and this little known but very rich and varied tradition of Tibeto-Burman languages in a country that is dominated by the Indo-European languages of northern and western India and the Dravidian languages to some lesser degree in the south of India. This occasion would have been a project that would have been very dear to my mother's heart had she been alive today. Her cousin, my uncle, Rajkumar Singhajasana, and my aunt, Inimsi Charu, are in the audience, and I hope you will agree with me that this venture of Imasi, the foundation that I founded in her memory and to preserve her legacy of literature, this Conference of Conservation of Culture would have interested her very much. I translate her works, and I find that she is drawing and quoting lyrics from Pena ballads, like the one that you've just heard from Marjing. I find that she is using Ari Balon, the old archaic language that is on the verge of extinction in Manipur. I find that she is using Sanskrit slokas, like the one we heard Vidya sing so beautifully to Saraswati, for instance. So for her, knowledge knew no boundaries. It is all property that belongs to all of us. And she herself translated from and into Bangla, where Bengal was the state where she grew up as a teenager. And she worked and studied in Santiniketan, and she wrote essays about tribal Manipur. Wherever she went, she responded in her literary style by writing essays and poetry and song, paying tribute to the universality of knowledge, that knowledge belongs to all of us. It has no boundaries. It has no possession that is our own, except that we own it collectively. So the efforts that Indira Gandhi Center and UNT and Imasi Foundation have put to bring together this training of 30 archivists for the future of Northeast India, specializing in Tibeto-Burman languages, is a very, very special one, and one that we're just initiating and will be an ongoing project in the years to come. And the years to come are very important because an important partner in this is the entertainment company called TANTHA. And there are many of you, I hope, who are sitting at home in Manipur or in other parts of India, and I know some of my friends in New York and in Texas and London are watching as well. TANTHA is live streaming this right now, and TANTHA is an entertainment company highly popular among the millennials, the below 35 generation of Manipur. And we bring this message about the beauty and the importance and the danger that Tibeto-Burman languages face, including our own language, my own mother tongue, Manipuri or Meiteilon, but also our cognate cousin languages of the Kukichin family, of the Nagas, of the Boros, of the Kacharis. These are all traditions that are very shaky in this age of great, tremendous, and rapid change that is coming to northeastern India today. So the recognition and support by Indira Gandhi Center is very gratifying because we come to them with an idea. They received us warmly, and with their help, and with Shobhana, with whom I've been working for almost 10 years now, coming together to do this would have been an extremely gratifying and event and a venture that Binodini, the writer, would have liked very much, because she was very much fond of culture, of cultural heritage. She loved her Manipur, she loved Northeast India, and traveled all over the place. And she interacted in many different ways, in many different creative ways with the rest of India, whether it is in Santiniketan or a friendship, I'm so happy to say, of Ila Chowdhury, for instance, the late Shankar Chowdhury, the sculptor, the former chairman of Lalit Kala Academy. They went to Santiniketan together. They maintained friendships over lifetimes. So thank you all for coming. So I put my hands together to welcome my dear friend, Shobhana Chelliah, who has been coming to Manipur for she will tell you this. She can tell a story better than I can. But Shobhana Chelliah, I've requested her to give the memorial lecture for this year for M.K. Binodini Devi. And the topic of, I guess partly my choice, and partly your choice, is the future of Tibeto-Burman languages in this global age, with particular emphasis on the languages of Manipur. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Shobhana Chelliah from Texas, the University of Texas. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. And hello to all the people who are catching this on live stream. It's a real honor for me to be here. As Somi said, we've known each other for quite a while, because I've been going to Manipur for the past almost 30 years. I started visiting Manipur as a graduate student and started working on the Manipuri language for my dissertation, which finally came out as a book, a grammar of the language. And so it helped me really, through all those years, connect with many people there and gain an appreciation for that language, and also some of the other languages spoken there. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity to present to you my engagement with those languages and my hopes and aspirations for those languages in the years to come. So starting off, we know that there's incredible diversity in all of India. And we're going to contrast this with the diversity that we see in Manipur state. So we have 4 different language families in India, as many of you know, some of them hosting very large families, such as the Dravidian family, language family, that has, say, about 70 languages in it, with languages that are of many millions of speakers. Right? I believe, so we would look then at the Indo-Aryan language family, which has even more languages in it. And here we find languages like Hindi, which may have 500 million speakers in the realm of that. And the numbers do go down, but even the smallest languages like Konkani, which belongs to this language family, still has at least about 2 million speakers. So there are some very robust and very large families in both the Dravidian and the Indo-Aryan language families. And then we go to the other 2 language families, we see that the numbers decrease quite radically. So let's look at this one. This is the Munda family. Many people don't know this is Austroasiatic, and it has 2 different branches, the Munda branch of languages, and then Kasi, which many of you are familiar with. And here, we don't find half as many speakers. We find far smaller numbers of speakers for both the Khasi language and for the languages in the Munda family. There are some that are quite small. Santali may be slightly larger than the others, but none of them actually match up to something like Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, Marathi, Bengali, or any of those, which are in the many millions of speakers. Now, we go to the last, but the best, in my opinion, language family, and that is the Tibeto-Burman language family. Here, we have an incredible amount of diversity, almost, say, about 257 languages and counting. I say and counting because as people start exploring closer and more through the areas where these languages are spoken, they discover new languages, languages that are defined as languages and not as mother tongues or dialects, because they're mutually unintelligible with their neighboring varieties. So people, as they explore, find that there are new languages here, and we don't know how many there are. We don't know how many there are and how many speakers there are, but right now our numbers are at about 257. And there's incredible diversity here and also density of speakers. We find them going all the way through Himachal Pradesh, Nepal, Sikkim. We have the Tibet-oid, kind of the languages that fall into the Ladakhi group and the Tibetan group of families. Then we have the languages that are going in the Northeast Asian region, Arunachal Pradesh, that is the Tani group. We have the languages going through Nagaland, that is the Naga groups of languages. It's kind of a loose affiliation of languages. When we look deeper at the Naga group, there's really a lot more diversity there than one language family, more to be discovered there. And then finally, well, we don't want to leave out Meghalaya and Mizoram and Tripura, but we're going to hit on that one that we're going to discuss in detail today, and that is the state of Manipur and the languages that are spoken there. When you contrast, we know that there's diversity all through the country. But when you contrast the languages that are spoken in Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, and these other two language families, you see why linguists are very eager to come and do what we call language documentation on those languages. The larger languages are vibrant. They have what we call high vitality indices. The smaller languages are weak on the vitality scale. And what I'd like to do today for you is to contrast what it means to be a vibrant language and what it means to be a weaker language. And so we're going to look at Manipur State, which has some 35 languages now, that is 35 recognized languages. And we're going to look at one very vibrant language, the language Manipuri or Meiteilon, and we're going to look at one that is not quite so vibrant. And I would like to bring to your attention why it is that these differ. So let's zoom into the state of Manipur. Before we do that, let's take a look at this. I think this might give you an idea of what we're dealing with here. The substitute for Sanskrit anything that's Sanskritic or related to Sanskrit. So we've got English, which is very well known around the country. We've got Sanskrit spoken by many other people. Sanskritic languages like Hindi and so on spoken by many millions. Then as we move down, we've got only a few languages of all of the languages that are of India. I think Ramesh had said today, did you use the number 800? There may be 800 languages that have been identified for this country, and only 22 of those are really recognized as national languages, official languages. And so as we move down, if you look at the bottom rung, you'll see that there are the most of the languages, the bulk of languages that we have the fewest numbers of speakers. In the Tibeto-Burman belt, that's basically where most of the languages fall, right at the bottom rung. So numerically, we're already sort of at a disadvantage for the vitality scale. Are there other factors that are making these languages less vital? And let's take a look. Let's take a look at a case where we see something quite vital. We're going to come back to this one in a second, and we're going to look at Manipur State. So in Manipur, we have three different large-scale subgroupings that we can recognize. The first of these is what have been traditionally thought of as the Naga languages. And again, as I had mentioned before, although these are called the Naga languages, when you look at them linguistically, some of them are as distinct from each other as maybe something that is Naga and something that's been called Kukichin. There are similarities, but they not necessarily all fall together. So these subgroupings on the left-hand side, Tangkulic languages, Zeme, Angami, Kochri, and then some that are just not yet grouped together. this is how linguists would rather classify them than lumping them all together as Naga. But you can see that they're spread throughout the state and are many in number. We have another group of languages that have been called Kukichin. Now linguists are moving to more of a geographic term for those. They're calling them South Central. And again, here you can see these are the number of different languages that are there. Gangde, Baites, Mite, Tadao, Vapai, Zhao. And then the old, what are called Old Kukichin, because people know very little about them, and they're spoken in that whole belt that is just south of Imphal, Il district. Some of them in Churachandpur and Senapati, as you see below. These have strong similarities with each other, and they really do seem to form a subgroup. So just in these very small languages, by small I mean this numbers of speakers are probably below, for most of them, below 10,000. Okay, so some of the languages, like some of the Tangkhul languages, have more speakers, but most of these languages have very few speakers. And then we contrast this with the language Manipuri or Meiteilon, which is spoken in the center of the state, in the central valley of the state. Here we have 1.2 million speakers, and one of the things we see about Meiteilon is that it has, in addition to larger numbers of speakers, use and functionality in many different domains of life, and going all the way from just talking to your mother and father and your son and daughter to the poetic and the literary and to meta language. So we can trace all this, and we're going to look at that right now and see what that's like. So let's start with the oral. Yes, the Manipuris have a very vibrant oral tradition. For example, they have this tradition of telling stories. I have done fieldwork in a couple of different instances, including in the classroom with speakers of different languages, say some languages from Africa and so on. And one of the things that's always struck me about Manipur is you can ask anyone about the stories, even little kids, and they'll know several stories. They may tell them in very cute ways that don't give you all of the right episodes, but they'll know the stories. It's even though you don't have grandma and grandma sitting around the fireside, this is the Pungawari tradition of grandma telling folk tales, you still see that there is transmission of these stories to children. And it seems to be happening through kids' books. And if you Google Manipuri folk tales, there are all these animated movie little snippets and people reading out the stories from books and so on. So there's a media, like there's an internet presence for these stories. So it's a live tradition, and there's a canon of these stories that everybody knows which they are and can tell you what the episodes are and refer back to them. The other thing that may not be something that is known to everybody here is that there is you may know the fact that there is a manuscript tradition throughout, in several places in the Northeast. Assam would be one of them. And Manipur is another. They have a treasure trove of early, let's say 16th century and post manuscripts. And these manuscripts are housed in private collections for the most part. There is a central collection, and there are also microfiche here at the Indira Gandhi Center. But the physical copies are distributed in smaller collections. And these are pictures here on the left lower corner. You see a picture of some of the folks that Somi had brought over from Kentucky, I believe, to come in and see what would be possible and what that treasure really looked like in Ozar Kale Chandra's collection. You'll see him on the right-hand side there. So let me tell you a little bit about this collection, because you might think, well, there are just a few of these tattered old things that are lying around, and that's actually not the case. There are hundreds of them. There's a catalog of what is available. I don't know what's still available. When this was written, it was known that there were at least 600 different, there were maybe copies of the same thing, but at least 600 different instances or 600 different manuscripts that could be found that may have been written at different times. And they range from small in size to large, something that needs to be laid flat. Many of them are about 50 pages long, I think is the kind of average length of these. There are written on bark with charcoal pen. Kind of laid under glass and not ever seen. So here's a culture that is looking at its history, its genealogy, its mythology, their rituals, and all manner of history for themselves that is encapsulated in these different manuscripts. So I've put up here what some of those things deal with. So you can see that, and there are numbers behind next to each one saying how many of the manuscripts deal with these different topics. But they are there, but they are not accessed by the West, that is true, or by any outsiders, but they are being accessed and understood by the Manipuris themselves, because there is literature that tries to, that interprets what is there, and teaches in school, kind of interpretive canon of what these, some of these hold, especially the myths, the ones that are the large kind of epics. So people know that they exist and they are working on them. And so you see that it's gone from something that was oral, that was then written down on these Agarbar manuscripts, and then now translated and transliterated into a Bengali script from whatever was originally there, and then a modern translation into Manipuri of those. So we're seeing that people are kind of trying to follow along this tradition and pass that on to generations. Now, one thing we will note is there's no access for scholarship that is more universal, because it is still all in Manipuri that's there. Okay, so there's other literature that's also available. That's the other thing you'll notice if you go to Manipur. Everybody's writing something. People are publishing. Everybody has a stack of books somewhere in their house, and if you ask them about it, they'll say, oh yeah, that's something that I wrote. I mean, I've had this, people always are giving you books, and you say, what is that? They'll say, oh, it's a book of poems. It's a book that I wrote about a history of it. Everyone's publishing and writing. Well, it's not just anything, because if you look at the Sahitya Award winners, just Google award winners, and you'll see Manipur has a really strong presence in that list. So I just put, I didn't mean for this for something for you to read carefully, but just to see how every decade we see more. So here's the 1981 to 1999, and then 1973 to 1979, which is when they stopped writing about it. But you'll notice here, of course, that Binodini Devi is listed as a winner here, and so that's kind of fitting that we're talking about that here. I think the Imasi Foundation is another example of how rich the literature, the tradition is in Manipur. And we see that the writings of Binodini that are coming out, they're coming out in translation in English and are made accessible not only to school children and through curriculum requirements in Manipur, but also to people who can't access the language. They can still access the ideas through the translation work that Somi is doing. Okay, so what have we seen so far? We see they've got an oral tradition. We see they have a historical manuscript tradition that is now moved into the modern age through translation. We also see that they write creatively in all sorts of genres, and then we see also there is translation work going on into English. So this is a language with what we call resources. This is a highly resourced language, or at least it is a resourced language. When we try to define the term resourced, under-resourced versus resourced, one of the things we look at is how much print is there. And the second thing we would look at is how much do we understand about the language structure. Is there a way for me to teach you the language? I can't teach you the language unless I know about the structure. And when we look at Manipuri, there's a lot written about the language, both from a linguistic point of view and from kind of a school textbook point of view. So I didn't have any space on my slide to put all of the school grammars, but there are many school grammars of Manipur. But you do see on the top some linguistic grammars. In the second row, you see dictionaries that have come out, and there are more that are coming out from either individuals or through government sponsored kind of publications. And you also have books that deal with script, how to write. Because if you know something about the history of script in Manipur, there was an original Meiteilon script. Then in the 1700s and following, Bengali was adopted for writing, the Bengali Assamese script was adopted for writing Manipuri. And then in the 1990s, there was a revival and a reinstatement of the original script. So kids really needed to be given instructions, and also adults, or whoever was teaching it. So there are a lot of books on script. There are also newspapers. There are also journals. They have got a print presence. And they also have a presence on radio. So there's AM radio, there's FM radio, there are TV stations, and it's everywhere, right? Now we also find that there is social media presence. So people are WhatsApping and Facebooking using the Roman script. The spelling hasn't been standardized, but you know, LOL, it isn't standardized for most of social media. So people are writing in short form, as they do in social media. So that's the case. So now, is there another step that's been taken? One really important step that's been taken to move and make the language even more vital has been this creation of Unicode for the entire set of symbols that are from the original writing system, the Meiteilon writing system. And this set includes those symbols that are used currently. So this particular array here has 35 different symbols. This would allow somebody to access some of those old manuscripts that we looked at and to retype them if they wanted to. It also has a subset, 27, which is used right now for the Manipuris. Why is this important? Why is Unicode at all important? It's actually quite important because when you type something in a font that can be transferred or is portable, then you can create sets, or you can create from your language something like a data set that somebody who does computational work can then use to then do more work on the language. So for example, if we were able to take many pieces of printed Manipuri matter, any kind of language matter, say it's a novel or a newspaper, and that was all done in Unicode, we could then put it in a data format that a computational linguist or a language engineer could train a machine to recognize patterns. And those patterns could then be used to then translate some additional or transliterate some additional materials of that language. So if we have a nice set of, or a large set, you've heard of big data, right? This is big data for language. Big data for language allows us to do things like voice to speech, speech to text, rapid translation, and parallel text creation in 2 different languages. And this becomes really important for making the language very vital because I won't stop speaking my language. If my language was Manipuri, I would continue to speak it because I can then access all of the benefits that are given to English speakers. I can access information about health, about things that have to do with the weather, or things that have to do with finances, because I'm seeing these translations translated, and I can access that information myself. So it is really a way to make the language more valuable if you're able to provide these sorts. So Unicode was an important step forward. Okay, so I'll just quickly then summarize. I think you've gotten the picture. There's a lot going on with Manipuri, and there is a great opportunity for it to push forward even more and to become even more vital, and for more children to continue speaking it and using it in different domains. It's already in different domains now, but if children are moving away and starting to speak English, what we call language shift, supposing kids decide these languages are not cool, I'm not going to speak Manipuri, I want to speak English. If these resources are brought to them, if they can play video games, if they can access the internet and do everything, then it's going to make it stronger. So there's a little bit of a step that still needs to be taken, but everything is ready and ripe for that to happen. Okay. Now I want to contrast that with another language that is spoken just south of Imphal in Chandel, in there's about 40 different villages, but the ones that we're going to look at are Tamla Kuren and Tamla Pokpi. It's a language called Lamkang. And here, there are about 5,000 speakers, or maybe there are 10,000 Lamkang somewhere around, but we know there are about 5,000 speakers in the vicinity here. And what we want to know here is how vital is Lamkang as opposed to Manipuri? What are the signs that we want to look for looking for vitality? What are the indices? Well, we've gone over all the ones for Manipuri. And when we look at similar things for Lamkang, we find that there's far less, although the community is trying to move forward in that arena. So what are they doing to do that? We see that there are community efforts to document the language. That is, that people are collecting information about the language, and they are archiving that, and then they're analyzing and studying that. So by creating an archive of the language, they're creating a resource that can be used for description. So that was that creating resources idea. And there's no standard writing system, but they're still moving forward with whatever they've got. They're really driven to write, and they're really driven to try to preserve. So I love these pictures because they tell you how intergenerational this is, how many generations are working on this project. So you see the gentleman in the middle with the red scarf. He is holding a device that is a radio. It's an FM radio. And in that radio, you can put a USB drive. And what he's done is he's bought a whole stack of these. He's not a rich person, but he's determined that everyone should learn about the folklore and folk songs of the Lamkang people. He's recorded them on these USB devices, and he goes far in the hills and other places, and he gives them out to kids and families. And he says, it's a radio, you'll want this, but also listen to the songs and listen to the stories. He's also written a book about proverbs, he's written a book about hymns. He's done a lot of work without really being educated in linguistics or in literature. We also have a speaker of Lamkang here, Sumshot Kular, who has gotten a degree in linguistics both at the University of Manipur and at our university, University of North Texas, in order to work on language structure, which will help then create those resources like grammars that we were talking about. And then we've got this gentleman here, all the way to that side, right under the wording, and he also has been determined to do some sort of documenting. So what he has done is, he was a minister in a church, and he told the kids, we're going to have a competition. Go talk to your elders, ask them to tell you a story, come back and tell it to me and we'll write it down. Whoever tells me the best story gets a prize. So all of these different methods to get people to think about their stories and think, why is that necessary? How come it's necessary here, but it wasn't necessary for the Manipuris? Well, this tells us that huge difference in what's going on with these two communities. With the case of the Lamkang, many of the speakers of Lamkang have left Manipur. The kids go out to study or to work. And many of them are speaking other languages because of intermarriage. And so the community can look around and see that the speakers of language are really going down. The numbers of speakers are going down. And whoever can speak the language doesn't know the stories. Remember I told you that all the young kids in Manipur I could ask and they knew the stories? Not true in Lamkang. The kids often don't know, and when I ask people of varying ages, they would know a few stories, but only the elders would know really a very large number of stories. So you can see the contrast there and see that there's different proficiency. They do have some things, and they've got a Bible, they've got hymn books, they have picture books for children, and they have a WhatsApp and a Facebook group, but they do not have textbooks. They don't have a grammar, they don't have dictionaries. They're missing some of those key components that we saw that the Manipuris had. We do have a Lamkang language resource at the UNT Digital Library, which we hope could be useful in creating some of those missing resources that would then help to raise the vitality of the language, to give it more resources so more people will be using it more often. So there are right now only 317 pieces in there. Most of them are sound, some of them are text, and what we're doing now is to put all the transcriptions up and put in some instructions on how these things can be used for pedagogical purposes. So this is the difference when you have an endangered language versus a vital language. For an endangered language, you have to create the resources to keep it going. For a vital language, you have to encourage more resource usage and more vitality. So I believe what we have here is now our vitality. We just kind of put this together to give you an idea. There's no scientific accuracy, but there is this visualization of what we're trying to aim for here. That with English, we have high vitality. It has all of the resources to bear, all of the kinds of things I noted. With Meiteilon, we've got some, and we're very stable, but we could go forward more. With Lamkang, we're sort of we're not down at the end, but we're very close to it. There's a lot more that needs to be done to keep it vital. And there are other languages in Manipur, like the Purum language, which has only about 300 speakers left. And again, no grammar and none of the resources that we talked about. So they are really in danger of not having a reason to, or not having encouragement to teach, to transmit the language, to save that information so that it's passed down in generations. So one of the questions we can ask is, why do we even care about a language like Purum, or why do we care about a language like Lamkang? Or for that matter, why do we care about a language like Manipuri? What is it that makes us say, we need to be doing more to make these languages more resourceful? Why don't we just, if they're going to go, why don't they all speak English or Hindi or a language that is useful, right? People say, I want to learn a language that is useful. So I wanted to end by just talking to you about two sets of reasons why we would care about these languages and whether making them more resourceful is a good thing for everyone, for society in general. So from a scientific point of view, knowing about these languages is useful because without that information, we don't get a kind of holistic view of what human beings can do with language. So the more languages we learn about, the more we're kind of surprised. We think we knew everything, but then suddenly we find a language which uses north and south to deal with things like next to. Everything is absolute direction, so I can't say, in some Australian languages, for example, a snake is next to me, I have to say a snake is to the south of me. Well, we didn't know that people orient themselves using absolute direction, but we had to know about that language to discover that cognition and language can work that way. So for linguistic universals and human cognition and culture, we'd like to know a little bit about each of these languages because we know as linguists that there is a gem of information in these languages. They're not all the same. They are not all kind of simplistic. In fact, sometimes we look at the small languages, they're even more complicated than some of the larger languages. I don't know if you've read something about that, but sometimes we see that small languages have fewer numbers of speakers and have less kind of outsiders trying to speak that language, and they simplify less. They seem to have a core of complexity to them. And so figuring out what we can do with language, we might only learn from those small languages. Then language history. We know a lot about Indo-European. We know about the Romance languages. We know how one descended from the other. And when we study that, again, we figure out how humans, it's a human system, right? So we know how human beings changed from being on all fours to then walking on two steps. We know that. Language is a human system. And to figure out how languages can develop and change, we need to know about those languages. They are the core part of the data for that. So we want to know about the Tibeto-Burman languages, small and big, to find out how languages change. That's the science part. And it may not interest anybody here. It might be very geeky and just sciencey. But there is a social impact part, which many people don't think about because they think, well, it's not a useful language, so they don't speak it. But in fact, what we've learned is that when people speak their mother tongue, when they know about their mother tongue or they engage with their mother tongue, there is some evidence that it is linked to social well-being, a feeling of well-being then leading to performing better in society. So we've seen with some Native American communities and some Canadian communities that kids who've been involved in language programs, for example, do better in school. There's a drop in the Salish community that saw a drop in alcoholism rates. In Canada, right north of there in Vancouver, they saw that there was kids who were involved in these language things did better health-wise, so diabetes instances, for example, dropped. So people are studying the connection between learning your mother tongue and just doing better overall in life, health-wise and in other ways. So we anecdotally know this is true, and now we're trying to really quantify it so that people see the importance of learning and knowing about these languages. So then, we also know that many of these languages hold these gems of pieces of information about traditional healing, plants, and so on. And I know Ramesh just went to Manipur and was experiencing something about that with the Manipuri healers. So once that information goes, it's very difficult to get it back. I was with the Lamkang speakers. When you walk outside, my friends will point to things and say, we eat this for headaches. This is good if you have a loose stomach. This is good. And I thought they were all weeds, but in fact, no. They all have a purpose and they all have use. And that knowledge is going away. And that's embodied, that is in the language. So the more you can collect and understand the language, the more you can save that information. So let's go to the last thing here, which is geopolitics, truth, and reconciliation. When you look at an endangered language, you're also often looking at a community that is in a place of political instability. And when you can use that language as a tool for healing, so it's something where people can express their trauma. They can express what distress they feel in their own language. Some of our documentary projects deal with memory, and memory especially of these kind of traumatic events. Nobody else comes to ask people these stories. We don't know about these small, what we think of as very small events, but they're huge events for these small communities. Sometimes they're decimated because they have to leave their villages, and as I was mentioning, there are intermarriages. They leave the state altogether, and that is something that then impacts them for the rest of their lives. If they could have part of that back through their language, and if they could express some of their experiences through their language, these are ways we think could be a healing and a balm to the troubles that they've had. Okay, so what I think then to conclude is when we look at the languages of Manipur, we learn a lot about really the whole macrocosm of endangered languages and vital languages. We have a vital language, and then we have languages there that need to be doing more to be secure and not to be lost completely. And through some of the steps, some very clear steps, that can happen. One of them is language documentation. Record and go out and preserve anything that is remaining of that language. If there are only 300 speakers left, go and record as much of that as possible. Then archive that so that it can be used at a later date to then do whatever kinds of learning communities want to do from that. Describe the language so that resources can be created, grammars, dictionaries, and other materials. And then archive the language so that it can be used archive it in data formats that can be used computationally so that there can be rapid translation and there can be creation of materials for that language to be used in all sorts of functions. So it's true that there are 257 Tibeto-Burman languages. Of those, many are very small and vulnerable, but there is a way forward for those communities. And that way forward really lies in that nexus between linguistics, which is understanding the language, and archiving, which is preserving those data in a way that can be accessed by communities later. Now, I'll just end with a very quick story. It doesn't have to do with India. It has to do with a speaker of a language called Miamia. His name is Darrell Baldwin. You can look him up. He is a McCarthy Genius Award winner. Why did he win that award? Because his language was completely silent. No one had spoken it for a generation. And he said, I want to speak my language. I need to speak this language. So what did he do? There were no speakers left. He went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., accessed the material that had been saved there, worked with a linguist to create teaching materials, learned the language. It wasn't the same as what his parents spoke, but he learned a version of that language. He married somebody, that person learned to speak it. They spoke only that in their home. Their kids learned to speak it. And so he started creating this revitalized, regenerated form of this language. And how did he do that? Through documentation and archiving. Those two things together allowed this language to revive. And it is now a language that is taught in the Myanmar College, and it is thriving, and they are also studying the health benefits for their children of that community because they're learning that language. So archiving and linguistics do go hand in hand, and we see that there's possibilities for Manipur for the smaller languages. How about the larger languages? For Meiteilon, we still don't see archiving happening in that way that we would like to push it to that next level. So yes, it's good for the small languages, but it's really good for the large languages as well, because it could then really move all of these scripts, for example, into more access and more preservation, and kind of reveal the beauty and the mysteries of that place that most of us in India don't really know about, because there is no access to those information. So I will stop there, and we're going to probably go to discussion. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Ramesh Gaur. I'm the director and head Kalanidhi division in Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts. So let me welcome you all once again. Thank you, Shobhana, for a wonderful lecture. And I'm sure you all enjoyed it. And I'm sure you have a lot of curiosity and some kind of suggestions or some comments or questions. So let's first have a couple of questions or comments from all of you. So please raise your hand if you wish to ask anything, Shobhana, or you want to add or comments anything. Maybe somebody
Would you wait for the microphone? There's one floating around. Thank you, Sudipta.
I was thinking about your point about history, that we in India are not likely, an important way of understanding the history of the people in India is through language, isn't it? Through linguistic study of reconstructions, etc. So could you say a little more about that in terms of the Northeast context? Because I think we have, in fact, very little knowledge of the history of those languages. Some of them may be what they call isolates, even though they're not, or even though we lump them together as the Tibeto-Burman group. Some of them may actually not even be part of that group and may have something to tell us about migration.
Yeah, there are definitely people looking at the connection between the subgrouping and the groups and migration. So can we tell where the language actually originated? Was it Southwest China? And then people working through. Some people say, Van Dream, that it was Northeast India, and then people going up to China. So people do use language information for that. The thing to know about reconstructing history for the Tibeto-Burman languages is we have, in subgroups, in really lower subgroups, we can make connections, but as we go a little bit higher, it becomes difficult because we have so many missing pieces. And the more languages that disappear, we have more missing pieces. So instead of, for say, Indo-European, they have the tree model. So they've got like Indo-European on top, and then it branches to all these. For Tibeto-Burman, we know so little. We use, and you were probably aware of this, we use the fallen leaves model, which is like just groups of languages but not connected. We're not sure how they're connected or where they're connected. If we could computationally have a resource that is a computational resource, then we could do more rapid comparisons between these languages and come up with the relatedness more quickly. So I think it's all about data formats and creating that computational resource that would help.
Is there a likelihood that there's some of those languages which is local and but not brought over from the Sino-Tibetan area or whatever?
There may be some that were created, like Sorbonne is a language that is now a combination of some Kogichin and some Tanghulic language, but there are isolates. Meiteilon, for example, is not lumped together with anything.
I might add that one encounters many origin stories, and many of them are expressed in ritual as well. Like in Manipur, we have one where you erect a bamboo pole in the month of November, and you pull a little lantern up on top every evening, and you bring it down in the morning. And the story goes that is to tell the older brother in the hills, the younger brother used to send this light up to say, hey, dude, I'm okay, don't worry about me. So there are origin stories that are expressed in ritual and are told as part of folklore as well. On the other hand, there's a very interesting and important instance in Manipur where the Thado, some people of the Thado tribe discovered a ballad which they understand to point to their origins as the lost tribe of Israel. So now we have, I think, thousands of people of the Kuki and Mizo background. I think Tani might add to this a little bit from Mizoram, where you have synagogues and people have accomplished Aliyah, the going back to the promised land, and they have identified as the Ben Menashe, the name Menashe, the lost tribe of Israel. And that is based on a poem, that is based on a ballad, and it is a ballad that someone like a margin of the community is able to sing. And by deciphering and interpreting the words to this particular ballad, one has created a new religious affiliation. One has created a new sense of belonging. One has actually even created a new national character. So stories and language and linguistics can actually have amazing repercussions.
Thank you, Swami. So, any other question or comments? No, please. Can you bring some mic here?
I just want to share my experience regarding Nagaland. I was there I belongs to RSTV, Rajya Sabha TV. I was there for a reporting assignment for 15 days. I saw their official language is English there, Nagaland. And Nagamis is the local language which is spoken by, but there is no written literature is there. I've tried to find out in the schools also that if any class in any class any subject like Nagamis is being taught or not, but I couldn't find out. So can you tell us that why is such a big state only English is there and no Nagamis is there, and also no newspaper, no books and no written material is also there? It should be there, right?
I agree, it should be there. That would be really good. So there are many languages, right? So Ao Naga, for example, has a grammar now, and they are trying to build storybooks and the kind of more popular things that you're talking about, teaching kids in school and so on. Oh yeah, let's have.
We have someone from Nagaland who's part of the workshop. Would you like to address his question? Thank you.
With respect to Nagamis, I would say that Nagamis is more like a lingua franca, which is used in like everyday for everyday communication. But when it comes to standardization of language and all, English is like very much. It has more prestige, and like it is taught in the schools. And Nagamis is actually not encouraged in schools, even like we are encouraged to speak English, and Nagamese is actually not allowed in the schools, but then children, they continue to speak that because it's more to do with our multilingual setup of the society in a way. So with regard to literature, if we have Nagamese churches where they have Bible, they have written, come up with Nagamese Bible also. So there are some sort of literature in that. That is all.
Thank you. Any other? So, Shobhana, I have a question. Basically, you are a linguist and you have been in India earlier. The difference which I see in universities in US and even libraries, archives, there is a kind of coordination. Like if you talk about focusing on documentation and archiving, language archiving, it's hardly any awareness in India, and hardly any kind of research is being undertaken by any university. Yeah, I was in GNU for 7 years, and I've been traveling a lot and be part of many universities. Why India is so diverse? Why we are not able to have a focused program? Why we are not able to start any such activity, any program in India? What are the regions which you feel, and where we need to work on that?
Gail is here from DU, so I will just say it like I think it, and you can then say what you think. But I think that in India, linguistics has a tradition where our faculty who taught, like for when I was a student here, and my teachers studied in the 70s in the US, and they were in a very kind of a theoretical model, which used certain types of data sets, but didn't look at whole data sets, like a whole language. When I went to school in the US, in exactly the same university, in fact, where Gail went to school, so we studied with people who said, look, you can learn only so much by looking at lists of sentences from a language. You need to learn the whole language. Find out what happens not only with the noun clauses, you need to know what happens with all the verb clauses. Go learn the entire thing. Go describe the whole language. That change from theory to whole language data collection hasn't quite hit. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does happen in DU, it happens in JNU, but it's not a huge paradigm here. And I think the crux of it is that archiving and dealing with big data is very frightening to people. They think I have to finish my thesis in 4 years, let me collect a list of sentences and be done with it. Rather than saying, I'll collect those sentences, but I have no idea if they're really good or bad until I see them in context. So let me also collect the context and analyze them. That second part hasn't happened. And if we can show people that with tools for language documentation, they can analyze large data sets and conversations, stories, and so on, and extract really good data from that, and then this documentation will move forward. So I think it can happen, but the people who teach at universities have to tell their students, these data sets won't do. You need to go forward and do something a little bit more, even if it's small steps. I had, last point on this, I had suggested to Manipur University, because they often do descriptive grammars, to not ask for any more MA theses that are descriptive grammars, where they describe the noun phrase, verb phrase, adverb phrase, and so on. Everyone has to do a text collection, a collection of narratives which they analyze word for word and morpheme by morpheme, like break it down into their smallest things, and then give people credit for that, because that is, to me, like that is the thing that's going to break this impasse that we've come to. So that's my observation there. Don't broadcast this and don't tell anybody else I said that.
Just on the internet internationally, that's what we do. No one else. But I do want to say one thing, and that is, from my perspective as Imasi Foundation, working with you and Ganesh over the last few months on the language and linguistics, I was interested in this gentleman's question about books. And we've also talked about books. Manipur publishes, I believe, about 20 books a month in Meiteilon. where does literature come in? Where does the art of the language? Here we have the linguistics, which gives the exams a structure of language, and then, but ultimately, is as with Marjie's performance, and there's oral literature, there's the art of the word, the art of the language, the desire to express yourself in a particular way, either as a poet, or in a poem, or in a play, or a short story, or writing. And I see Rojibala here, who has been working with, I mean, she's come to me and asked me questions because she's writing a thesis, a doctoral dissertation on Binodini. So we have people who are interested in and how language is being used by the people in terms of expression, literature, and art. I don't know if you want to add something to it, or if you want to have further things, or I just wanted to put it out there from the point of view of literature. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you pass on the mic here?
Dear Professor Shobhana, you come from a linguistic background, and I come from a theatre and performance studies background from School of Arts and Aesthetics, Delhi. I have reservations on the very term called oral literature, because oral literature, when we use this term oral literature, it tends to kind of create a binary between written and oral. You know, there is a binary, there is a two-pole binary. Whereas some of the scholars like Ngugi Wa Thiong, Piri Jerimu, and all the third world from the third world countries, they are arguing that oral traditions, the oral tradition is no kind of smaller or low culture than the written tradition. It has its own richness. And then that's why Ngugi Wa Thiong tries to create a new term called orature, which encompasses all these performative traditions and all. That's one point. And the questions that was asked on Nagaland, I would say that there are books written. For example, Temsula Au's book, This Hills Called Home. You know, it's a written record of the oral culture, oral tradition, the orature. You know, it reflects there. Then Western Curie and all. So there are books available on the Naga folklore and all. So we should not miss.
Nice term. I should try to use it. Orature, right? Orature. Yeah. And I think Delheim says, what was the term that Delheim used for
You're talking of speaking, the acronym speaking that he broke up, S for speaker, P for various things.
No, but so when he did his discourse analysis of the Native American, stories, then he had a term for it that was similar to this, and kind of, it was not oral literature. But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see that.
I have to say that it's actually my doing, because oral literature, in the way that it's being used today, is actually something that I've been toying with for the last couple of years. I'm not a scholar, I'm not an academic, and least of all, I'm not a linguist. But I'm a cultural producer, I'm a curator, and what I do is I set up a structure by which certain ideas can come together to perhaps introduce something and produce something that is new, something that has not existed before. That kind of investigation, in my experience, comes out of the lecture series that we're doing, where because Binodini was a writer, I have, except perhaps with the exception of my uncle here, I've actually given an emphasis to other writers. And one writer had said to me, I don't want to discuss my books. I've written my book, I've done my work, you go to your work, go sit in a corner and read my book like I used to read other people's books. And it got me thinking that not every book is read, not every book is written. There is older tradition, especially in the state that I come from, that I live in the region that I am in. There's a larger, primal, older tradition, and perhaps the predominant tradition of literature that is not written, that literature is read. So my intention is to use this workshop and the experiences from here to mine this kind of understanding that we may glean from this in order to build a literature festival for the northeast of India, which will be focused on oral literature. So I have to take the blame for reducing it to a very simplistic term, but it is really in the interest of creating an event. Because my question is, that song that Marjin sang, what is the literary worth of that? Do we know? Is it literature? Are song lyrics literature? I asked Nathan this. He said, very good question. We haven't even thought that much about it. So we are actually venturing, as with this workshop, as Ramesh was saying, the first time that it's happening in India, we're venturing into very unknown territory. And I think that your contribution here today is like a fantastic spark of light.
Is something very important, or you want to say something, or?
About literature.
This is going to be an unending discussion. We can have somebody else if he's interested, or like because it's almost 7:30. Many of you will like to go, so we'll not. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor Shobhana. It's really wonderful, enriching, and enlightening lecture. I'm privileged to be here. My name is Miranda. I speak Meiteilon. I'm from Manipur. But when I had studied Meiteilon, the script that we had used was the Bangla script. Now, eventually, we have come into that Meitei Mayek, and now in your presentation also, I see that the Meitei Mayek. So, when you talk about documentation, I'm a little curious. See, in which script are you documenting? Because we belong to a generation where we have actually not learned Meitei Mayek. And whatever the rich literary heritage that Manipur literature has, and most of the works that Maharaj Binodini has given, it's all in Bangla script. So is that a challenge for you to document? And how far are we in this challenge? Because the coming generations, they are all being taught in Meitei Mayek. So they will not be able to access the Bangla scripts.
Okay, this is a great question. So for the linguist, when we recorded, we really went from the voice. So we didn't do text at all. We wanted to know what natural speech was like. So we recorded a lot of people and then transcribed that in the International Phonetic Alphabet. So we didn't really use a script for that. But your question reminds me of the fact that we were just in Guwahati with my team, and we met somebody, S. Mahavir, or what was his name? Ranbir, as Ranbir Singh, who is a computational linguist, and he's working on transliteration from Bengali script to Meitei Mayek automatically. So if that works, there's some complications because the way that the graphemes work together in the way that Manipuri is written in Bengali is a little bit complicated. If that works and he's able to do that, then there would be access for kids to be able to read some of the older things because they would be in that new script for them. So we are hoping that OCR, character recognition software, can give people access to things like the older literature, which, as you're saying, many young people can't read it anymore because they never learned the Bengali ASME script. So there's hope for that to happen.
Thank you.
In 2012, when I translated Crimson Rain Clouds, Assam Punjabi, with Thima Books, and your professor Shami Bandyopadhyay was my co-conspirator on this project, I translated a 50-page play by Binodini, which is very well known. So we had the original in both Meitei Mayek and Bangla script, and then my translation into English. And actually, I have a romanized version as well. So we've had to pay in 2012. Now, of course, Marjing is the first batch of Manipuri students who have learned only Meiteilon and not Bangla. So we have this very curious situation where there's a very sharp break in our society where people below the age of 20 cannot read Manipuri Bangla script, and people above the age of 20 cannot read Manipuri in Meiteilon. And in this story, I just want to say, and this is something I've been waiting to say on an international and national stage for a very long time, we have an unsung hero. None of us in Manipur know the name of Michael Evers. We have an American living, he's an American, isn't he? And living in Dublin, who, through just a passion for language and scripts, actually has been instrumental in getting Meiteilon into Unicode. Now, I don't know how much Mr. Everson knows about this. I've corresponded with him when he was doing this because it was very interesting. The Unicode proposal is like this thick. It's a passion, it's a work of love and passion by someone who has not even been to Manipur. And this is the kind of generosity and intellectual curiosity and passion which I really appreciate on the international stage, the way that Ramesh and IGNCA has helped us and been so forthcoming, the way that UNT has been giving us ideas. I mean, for us Manipuris, yeah, we're interested in Manipur and Meiteilon and all that. But for other people who really don't even have to do it, they take it upon themselves that if it were not for Mr. Everson, and I've been saying he should get a really big prize from Manipur if I were to find anything, Meiteilon would still not be in Unicode. To make the transition, the platform into the computer age, is due to an American who, for no reason except that he happens to like words in many different languages actually, as a hobby, he chose Meiteilon out of the blue.
So thank you, Swami. Let me, I think, yeah, please. So one and last.
And one over here.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Professor, for a very interesting talk. My question is rather, there's always been this theory, and there are even folklores about, how the Meiteis came from elsewhere to Manipur. And, I was once told by a very respected musician in Manipur, where he came across this line in a folk song. In Manipur it says, Ural Chingjao Karusi, that would mean, let's go and conquer the Ural Mountains. So, Ural, for example, is very far from Manipur, where the present day Manipur, that might be in, say, Russia, for example. So my thing here is, can we kind of, study the characteristics of the language, Manipuri, Meiteilon, and the folklores, and the songs, the poetry, and use, available technologies today to kind of trace the original Meiteis, for example? And there are words in Manipuri, say, Nongsa, for example, that would mean lion. Lion is not found in Manipur or nearby places, but the words are there. So can we kind of use technology somehow and, to repeat my question, trace back the place where the Meiteis came from? Thank you.
It has been done for Indo-European. So when people say, where was the homeland of Indo-Europeans? They look at the words that they've reconstructed, that if they compare it across all of the Indo-European languages that they know, and then they took the core words that they felt were shared by all of them, and they said that these look like they would have been the ancestors' language. And then they said, well, if there's a word for pineapple, or there's a word for shell, or they must have been somewhere near the ocean. So they do that in historical reconstruction and looking at how language tells us about prehistory. So I think that there's a possibility, especially I know that there's Alec Cook from Nanyang Tech University in Singapore. Alec works in Nagaland. He works on Ao Naga, but he has a project looking at migration and language. It's very similar things to what you're talking about. So there's a way of doing that. And
can you read some? Yeah.
Regarding the inclusion of
Meiteilon, from my page, we got a chance to read many of Boboksi Binodini's stories in Meiteilon, starting from class 8 to till 12. Like from 8, we got a chance to read about.
Excuse me. If you want to interact with him, you can interact later. If you have any question to Professor Shobhana Chelliah, then I'll address to her.
Okay.
If you don't have any question, then
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So, some questions? Yeah. Yes, please.
My question is regarding the challenges that a linguist faces while doing documentation or archiving. Okay, so there is a community in tribal community in Meghalaya. They communicate since they live very close to nature. They imitate birds, sounds of birds chirping, tunes from the natural sites. Okay, so they even communicate through tunes. Okay, they name their children. The mother will create some tunes and then select some tunes, and that tune is a name. Okay, so that kind of communication, that kind of language, it seems to me that it is almost impossible to represent it through inscription, or graphical representation is almost impossible, as I see. So how do you tackle such kind of problems as a linguist? Can you please share?
Yeah, I would really like to know where that language is spoken, but we do know that there are in Meghalaya, so there are whistling languages somewhere, and it's usually not the whole language, but especially where there are hills, people will use whistling because it travels faster, and there's a tune that's used to say, go get the sheep, or it's time to come home, or who you're calling. And so you're right, you can't write it down, but you can notate it the way you do music. So there's a way of writing it, but you would not use phonetic symbols, you'd use music symbols and do it that way.
Thank you very much. So let me just conclude your words of thanks, Shobhana. I'm a linguist, I'm a librarian, and being an archivist. Documentation and archiving to me is more to preserve these endangered languages. Because what example Shobhana has quoted, that a person, individual, reconstructed the language himself, and then his wife, and then family, and then so on and so. So in case, as she has mentioned, that I have told, we have more than 800 languages, and currently 90% of our population just speak 10 languages. So imagine how many, only 10% are aware of or linked with those 700 plus languages. And slowly, what is happening? Many of these languages are either extinct or on verge of extinction. So, as a library person, my biggest concern is that you cannot force anybody to learn or to speak that language. But as a matter of cultural diversity, at least we can preserve them. So whenever some researchers want to work on that, or somebody want to learn it, somebody want to make use of that, and that is the area we are unable to work on it. Give an example, we have almost near about 10 million manuscripts currently estimated in this country. And these manuscripts are in different scripts, which are very few scholars understand that. But what is happening slowly, even those scholars will be no more. What will happen? All these millions of manuscripts become just a waste paper. You are not able to read it because you don't have a person to understand it. Right? So why this documentation and archive is important? Right? Any point of time, because you are blessed with the technology. Technology is going to help you in documentation and preservation of these scripts, all kind of resources which you, any point of time somebody can retrieve it. And I think this is something is lacking. Neither linguists are taking much effort in that direction in India, and neither people who are doing archiving or people like us, we are not much concerned about that. And this is the reason when I came to know from Swami that Shobhana is interested in coming to India for this kind of programs and in different places. We were so happy because at IGNCA we are trying, we have number of efforts, like even we have started academic program, PG Diploma in Manuscriptology and Paleography, and we are teaching 6 languages. Now believe me, no university in this country is having a formal education program for teaching such ancient scripts. So we have thousands of universities in this country, but no concern about these kind of programs. You can imagine how we are lacking the program and planning in documentation and archiving, or even generating the new generation of scholars in this area. Recently, we have formed a small consortium, which is called as Consortium for Under-Resourced Indian Languages. With the support of UNESCO, Mr. Executive Devi and Mr. Anirudh Sharma is sitting here. They are very big supporter and they want to help Indian languages, and they are very supportive of that particular initiative. So I invite all those linguists and the people who are interested in preservation of Indian languages. They want to work for documentation and archiving of Indian indigenous languages. We'll be happy to associate. And thank you. This is a beginning, but we will not stop here. We will continue to move in different direction in India. And IGNCA is committed for it. We are committed to work because we always believe that culture is directly related to language, and without understanding a language, you cannot understand your culture. So your language is very important, and this workshop or this today's lecture, we are really grateful to you, and we look forward to work continuously with you on different areas and activities. And I also invite you to associate with IGNCA in different programs and help us in this novel course. And particularly my request to our university system, because the way, because I have spent some time in US, the way department there focus on different areas, we are very repetitive of our research. We don't go into these kind of areas where you need to collaborate with different stakeholders, because here linguist has to collaborate with archivists or like libraries, because there are certain things. Like I was happy to know those students, Shobhana's student talking about metadata, which is a domain of library expert, and a linguist student is talking about metadata, means they have done some good work to understand that how documentation is important. If I the same question in language student in my own university, I don't expect they will answer, they will understand what is metadata. So this is the difference between the research and the activities being undertaken in other. Hope in coming time our university will understand it and will work together to preserve these. Because excellent research has been done by many linguists. I know many, like Dr. Gail is sitting, I know Professor Anvita Aviz, he has done a great work. But somewhere I think in this direction the work is lacking, and we hope to have some good work in the future. With these words, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming and making this program a great success. A big round of applause for all the participants for such a essence hearing and also staying till late. And thank you very much. We look forward to meeting you in some other program of IGNCA. Thank you.
I have a little,
you want to say something?
No, I just have a little gift for you, that's all.
Where's our speaker? Thank you all.